Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a dirty rag as the emergency beacon pierced through the quiet hum of his repair station. The sound was different from anything he had heard before. Not the sharp, urgent tone of a standard distress call, but something deeper, more mournful. Almost like a whale song echoing through the void of space. His small maintenance station orbited the outer rim of the Kepler system, far from the busy shipping lanes where most mechanics made their living. Marcus preferred it this way. Out here, he could work in peace, fixing the occasional cargo hauler or research vessel that ventured into the system's edge. The pay was modest, but it was honest work, and he was good at it. The beacon continued its haunting call. Marcus frowned as he checked his instruments. The signal was coming from beyond the asteroid belt. In a region of space that most ships avoided, the gravitational anomalies there made navigation treacherous, and the radiation levels could fry unshielded electronics in minutes. "Computer, analyze the distress signal," Marcus commanded. The station's aging AI responded in its monotone voice. "Signal origin unknown. Frequency pattern does not match any registered vessel type in the database. Energy signature suggests extremely large mass. Estimated size, 15 to 20 kilometers in length." Marcus nearly dropped his coffee. 20 kilometers? That was larger than any ship ever built by human or alien hands. The biggest dreadnoughts in the Galactic Council fleet barely reached 3 kilometers. Something that size would dwarf entire space stations. "Are you sure about those readings?" he asked. "Confidence level, 97%. Signal strength indicates the source is approximately 6 hours away, at maximum burn." Marcus stared out the viewport at the distant stars. Every instinct told him to ignore the signal and go back to work. Whatever was out there was beyond his capabilities. He was just one man with basic tools and a ship that had seen better decades. But the mournful quality of the beacon tugged at something deep in his chest. It sounded lonely. Lost. "Computer, what's the standard response protocol for unknown distress signals?" "Standard protocol requires notification of local authorities and maintaining safe distance until properly equipped rescue vessels arrive." "How long would that take?" "Estimated response time from nearest Galactic Council patrol, 14 days. 14 days. If something was dying out there, it would be long dead by the time help arrived. Marcus had dedicated his life to fixing things, to bringing dead machines back to life. The thought of letting something suffer while he waited for bureaucrats to respond made his stomach turn. He made his decision. Fire up the main drive, plot a course for the signal source. Warning. Recommended course takes us through hazardous space. Radiation levels may exceed safe limits for extended exposure. I've got rad pills in a hardened suit. We're going. Marcus spent the 6-hour journey checking and double-checking his equipment. His ship, the Rusty Wrench, was old but reliable. He had rebuilt her engines himself and added extra shielding over the years. If any civilian vessel could survive the journey, it was this one. As they approached the signal source, Marcus gasped. Through the swirling radiation clouds emerged something that defied comprehension. The ship was massive beyond belief, its hull stretching away into the darkness like a metal mountain range. The design was unlike anything in the databases. Organic curves mixed with crystalline structures, as if someone had tried to grow a starship rather than build one. But it was clearly dying. Parts of the hull were dark and corroded. Sections that should have gleamed with polished metal were covered in what looked like rust or some kind of biological growth. The ship hung motionless in space, its massive bulk slowly tumbling end over end. Computer, any signs of life? Detecting multiple energy signatures. Power levels are extremely low but stable. No response to standard communication frequencies. Marcus tried every channel he could think of. Radio, laser burst, quantum entanglement communication. Nothing. But as he drew closer, the mournful beacon grew stronger. It seemed to be coming from the ship itself, not from any external transmitter. "Wait," Marcus muttered, studying the readings. "Computer, analyze the beacon signal again. Look for patterns in the harmonics." Minutes passed as the AI worked. Analysis complete. The signal contains mathematical sequences consistent with higher intelligence. Fibonacci numbers, prime sequences, and musical patterns. Music. The ship was singing. Marcus had heard stories from the old explorers about first contact protocols using mathematical sequences. But music? That suggested something far more sophisticated than simple intelligence. It suggested emotion. Open a channel on the same frequency as the beacon. Let me try something. Marcus cleared his throat and began to whistle a simple tune. Amazing Grace. One of the first songs his grandmother had taught him. He modulated the frequency to match the ship's transmission pattern. The response was immediate. The massive vessel's beacon shifted, incorporating elements of his melody. It was trying to communicate, to harmonize with him. The ship was not just intelligent, it was lonely. Over the next hour, they established a basic musical communication. The ship would sing a phrase, and Marcus would whistle back a response. Gradually, the ship's massive bulk began to rotate, bringing what appeared to be a docking bay into view. Lights flickered along the hull, creating a path toward the opening. I think it wants me to come aboard, Marcus said to himself. Warning. Unknown atmosphere composition. Biological contamination possible. Recommend full environmental protection. Already on it. Marcus suited up in his heaviest radiation gear and loaded his portable equipment onto a work sled. As the rusty wrench approached the docking bay, he marveled at the scale. The opening was large enough to swallow his entire station. The ship's technology was clearly advanced beyond anything he understood. But the principles might be similar. Every machine had the same basic needs: power, coolant, and maintenance. The docking bay sealed behind him with surprising gentleness. Atmosphere flooded the chamber, and Marcus's suit sensors showed it was breathable. Oxygen-nitrogen mix with trace elements he didn't recognize. The temperature was comfortable, and radiation levels dropped to normal. As he stepped off his sled, Marcus got his first good look at the ship's interior. The walls were smooth and organic-looking, covered in a network of crystalline veins that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. But something was wrong. Dark patches covered many surfaces, and the light from the crystal veins was dim and irregular. "Hello?" Marcus called out, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I'm here to help." The response came not as sound, but as sensation. Images flowed into his mind, not forced, but offered gently. He saw the ship in its prime, brilliant and alive, soaring between stars with purpose and joy. Then came the darkness. Creatures, small at first but growing larger, burrowing into the ship's systems like termites in wood. The ship had tried to fight them off, but there were too many. They fed on its energy, its very essence, leaving behind only corruption and pain. The ship was dying from the inside out. Marcus felt a surge of anger. He had spent his life fixing things, and seeing something beautiful being destroyed by parasites made his blood boil. "Show me," he said aloud. "Show me what's hurting you." The floor beneath his feet became transparent, revealing the ship's internal structure. It was breathtaking. A living fusion of technology and biology, with energy flowing through crystal conduits like blood through veins. But everywhere he looked, Marcus could see the damage. Dark growths clung to the crystal networks, pulsing with malevolent life. They had spread throughout the ship's body, choking off power flows and corrupting data pathways. "Computer," Marcus said into his suit radio, "record everything. I need to understand what we're dealing with." As he explored deeper into the ship, guided by the gentle touch of the vessel's consciousness, Marcus began to understand the scope of the problem. The parasites were not just physical creatures. They were energy vampires, feeding off the ship's life force and reproducing exponentially. Worse, they seemed to be intelligent, adapting to the ship's defensive measures and finding new ways to spread. But Marcus also noticed something else. The ship's immune system was sophisticated but gentle. It had never developed the kind of aggressive responses that might have stopped the infestation because it had been designed by a peaceful species. It was like a pacifist trying to fight a war. Noble, but ineffective. "What you need," Marcus said, placing his gloved hand on a crystal growth, is someone who thinks like a mechanic. Someone who's not afraid to get his hands dirty. The ship's consciousness touched his mind again, and he felt its gratitude mixed with hope. It had been alone for so long, fighting a losing battle against the parasites. But now, it had an ally. Someone who understood machines and wasn't bound by the peaceful nature of its creators. Marcus began to formulate a plan. He couldn't cure the ship with kindness or gentle treatments. This was going to require some old-fashioned human ingenuity and a willingness to fight dirty. The parasites had never encountered anything like human pragmatism before. "Don't worry," he told the ship. "I've dealt with infestations before. Rust mites, energy leeches, crystal borers. They're all basically the same problem with different faces. You just need to know which tools to use and where to hit them where it hurts." As if sensing his determination, the ship's lights grew slightly brighter. For the first time in centuries, it had real hope. The human was different from its creators, where they had relied on harmony and balance. This small being radiated a fierce protective instinct and the practical knowledge to back it up. Marcus spent the rest of the day exploring the ship and cataloging the damage. The infestation was worse than he had initially thought, but he had dealt with challenging repairs before. Every problem had a solution if you were creative enough and stubborn enough to find it. As he worked, he found himself talking to the ship like he would any other machine in his care. "Okay, girl. I know it hurts, but we're going to fix you up. It's going to take time, and some of the treatment might be uncomfortable. But I promise you'll feel better when we're done." The ship responded by providing him with internal maps and diagnostic data, sharing its knowledge freely. Marcus realized he was being trusted with secrets that few beings had ever seen. The ship's technology was beyond human understanding in many ways, but the basic principles were universal. Energy flowed, systems communicated, waste products needed to be removed, and parasites could be killed if you knew their weaknesses. That night, as Marcus set up a temporary camp in one of the ship's smaller chambers, he felt the vessel's presence like a warm blanket around his mind. It was protecting him, sharing its atmosphere and warmth, grateful for the first companionship it had known in ages. "Tomorrow we start the real work," Marcus said as he settled in for the night. "I hope you're ready for this, because it's going to get messy before it gets better." In response, the ship sang a soft lullaby that reminded Marcus of his grandmother's voice. Despite everything, the radiation, the isolation, the magnitude of the task ahead, he fell asleep, feeling more at peace than he had in years. Outside, in the darkness between stars, ancient things stirred. The ship's sudden resurgence had not gone unnoticed by the entities that had seeded the parasites. They had been waiting patiently for their harvest to ripen, feeding on the slow death of one of the universe's most magnificent vessels. But now something had changed. Something small and determined had boarded their prize. They would need to investigate, and if necessary, eliminate the interference. Marcus slept on, unaware that his simple desire to help had just declared war on forces older than human civilization. But the ship knew, and for the first time in centuries, it began to remember what it had been designed for before its creators had chosen the path of peace. Deep in its core, long dormant systems began to stir. Weapons that had been forgotten since the dawn of its existence slowly came online. The ship had been a warship once, before its builders had transformed it into an explorer. Perhaps it was time to remember those old lessons. After all, it had a human to protect now, and humans, it was learning, were worth fighting for. Marcus woke to the sound of something dying. The ship's gentle harmonies from the night before had been replaced by discordant wails that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He grabbed his equipment and followed the sound deeper into the vessel's corridors. What he found made his stomach turn. In a large chamber that served as some kind of processing center, hundreds of the parasites were visible for the first time. They looked like a nightmare fusion of mechanical spider and organic cancer. Metallic legs supporting bloated, pulsing bodies that glowed with stolen energy. They had been feeding off a major power junction, and the ship was screaming in digital agony. "Jesus," Marcus breathed, watching as the creatures scuttled across crystal conduits like ants on a corpse. How many of these things are there? The ship's response came as a flood of images. Thousands of chambers throughout its body, each infected to varying degrees. Some had only a handful of parasites, while others were so overrun that the original purpose of the room was unrecognizable. The creatures had been multiplying for centuries, feeding and growing stronger, while the ship grew weaker. But Marcus noticed something the ship hadn't. The parasites were avoiding certain areas. Specifically, they stayed away from sections with high electromagnetic fields and areas where the ship's internal temperature ran hotter than normal. They had weaknesses. Computer, Marcus said into his suitcom. Analyze these creatures. Look for vulnerabilities in their physiology. His equipment scanned the nearest cluster of parasites, while Marcus observed their behavior. They moved with purpose, working together to drain energy from the ship's systems, but they also showed clear signs of intelligence. When one found a rich power source, it would signal others to join the feeding. Analysis complete, his computer reported. Creatures show hybrid organic-mechanical structure. Organic components appear vulnerable to extreme temperatures and electromagnetic disruption. Mechanical components use energy storage similar to capacitor technology. So they're basically living batteries, Marcus mused. Which means they can be overloaded. He began to formulate his approach. Traditional pesticides wouldn't work on creatures that were part machine. But every electrical system had limits. Push enough current through them, and even the most sophisticated device would burn out. Marcus turned to the nearest wall and placed his hand on what appeared to be a control surface. The ship's consciousness immediately responded, eager for communication. I need to understand your power systems, he said. Can you show me how energy flows through your body? What followed was the most intensive engineering lesson of Marcus's life. The ship's builders had created something that transcended the boundary between machine and organism. Energy flowed through crystal matrices that could process information, regulate temperature, and even heal damage under normal circumstances. It was like having a conversation with the universe's most advanced computer, while it performed open-heart surgery on itself. But the ship had been designed by beings who thought in terms of harmony and balance. Its systems were elegant, but passive. The parasites had exploited that gentleness, feeding off the very trust that made the ship's consciousness so beautiful. What you need, Marcus said, is to learn how to fight dirty. He spent the next several hours studying the ship's power distribution network. The crystalline conduits could handle enormous amounts of energy, far more than they were currently carrying. The ship had been essentially running on life support to avoid feeding the parasites, but that strategy was slowly killing it. Here's what we're going to do, Marcus explained, pulling up a holographic display of the ship's internal structure. We're going to turn your immune system into a weapon. Those parasites can absorb normal energy levels, but they've never faced the kind of power surges that human machinery can produce. The ship was hesitant. Its builders had programmed deep prohibitions against causing harm to any living creature, even parasites. But Marcus could feel its pain growing worse by the hour. Something had to be done. Trust me, Marcus said. I've been fixing things my whole life. And sometimes you have to break something worse before you can make it better. Working together, they began to modify the ship's power distribution system. Marcus used his knowledge of human electrical engineering while the ship provided the interface with its crystalline technology. It was like teaching a classical musician to play heavy metal. Technically possible, but requiring a complete shift in philosophy. The first test was conducted in a small, heavily infested storage bay. Marcus rerouted power from 3 major conduits into the room's lighting system, then asked the ship to pulse all the energy at once. The result was spectacular and horrifying. The flash of light was visible even through Marcus's protective visor. When it faded, the chamber was filled with the charred remains of dozens of parasites. Their organic components had been flash-fried while their mechanical parts had overloaded and exploded. The smell was indescribable, like burning electronics mixed with rotten eggs, but it had worked. How do you feel? Marcus asked the ship. The response was immediate and joyful. For the first time in centuries, the ship had struck back against its tormentors. The pain from that section had vanished, replaced by the warm flow of clean energy. "That's just the beginning," Marcus said grimly. "We're going to clear every last one of these things out of you." Over the following days, Marcus and the ship developed their techniques. They learned that the parasites communicated through bioelectric signals, allowing them to coordinate feeding and reproduction. By jamming those frequencies, Marcus could confuse and isolate them. They discovered that the creatures couldn't survive in pure oxygen environments. Their hybrid metabolism required a specific mixture of gases. Most importantly, they found that the parasites were cowards. When faced with a real threat, they would flee rather than fight. Marcus began systematically clearing sections of the ship, working his way from the outer hull toward the core. Each victory made the ship stronger, and each success gave them new tools to use against the infestation. The ship's passive defense systems came back online one by one as power was restored to critical areas. But the parasites weren't giving up without a fight. As their numbers dwindled, they began to show new behaviors. They started attacking the ship's memory banks, trying to destroy its accumulated knowledge out of spite. They began clustering around critical systems, using their own bodies as shields to protect important feeding sites. Worst of all, they started trying to kill Marcus directly. The first attempt came on his 4th day aboard the ship. Marcus was working in a power distribution hub when the temperature suddenly spiked. The parasites had found a way to redirect heat from the ship's fusion reactors, turning his work area into an oven. Only the ship's quick action in creating an emergency cooling field saved him from being cooked alive. "They're getting smart," Marcus observed, checking his suit's heat readings. The ship's response was fierce protective anger. The gentle consciousness that had welcomed him aboard was learning new emotions. It was becoming possessive of its human friend, willing to fight for him in ways it had never fought for itself. Marcus felt that protective fury and made a decision that would change everything. "Show me your original schematics," he said. "Not what you are now. What you were built to be before your creators changed you." The ship hesitated. Those memories were buried deep, locked away when its builders had transformed it from a warship into an explorer. They were records of violence and destruction, everything its current pacifist nature stood against. "Show me," Marcus insisted. "If we're going to save you, I need to understand what you're really capable of." Slowly, reluctantly, the ship opened those ancient files. Marcus found himself looking at weapons systems beyond human imagination. Planet-cracking energy cannons, shields that could deflect supernovae, hull plating that could shrug off antimatter explosions. This wasn't just a large ship. It was the ultimate expression of an extinct warrior race's military technology. "Why did they change you?" Marcus asked, awed by the specifications. The answer came as images and emotions rather than words. The ship's builders had been a proud, warlike species that had conquered half the galaxy before achieving true wisdom. In their final years, they had recognized that their aggressive nature would ultimately destroy them. So they had transformed their greatest weapons into tools of exploration and peace. This ship had been their flagship, the most powerful warship ever constructed. But it had been neutered, its weapons removed, and its aggressive instincts suppressed. It had been sent out to explore the universe and share knowledge rather than dominate and destroy. "They meant well," Marcus said, studying the weapon schematics. "But they made you helpless. These parasites never could have infested an active warship." The ship acknowledged the truth of his statement. Its builders had assumed that the universe would respond to kindness and gentle strength. They had never anticipated parasites that fed on generosity and turned compassion into weakness. "Here's the thing," Marcus said, pulling up images of human history on his tablet. "My species learned something different. We learned that peace is only possible when you're strong enough to defend it. You can't be kind to things that want to destroy you." He showed the ship images of human conflicts, but also images of human protectiveness: soldiers defending children, medical workers risking their lives to save patients, engineers rebuilding cities after disasters. "We fight when we have to, but we fight to protect what we love." The ship began to understand. Strength and compassion weren't opposites. They were partners. True peace required the will and ability to defend it against those who would exploit gentleness. "I want to help you remember what you were," Marcus said. "Not so you can become a mindless weapon, but so you can protect yourself and others who might need your help. The universe is full of parasites. Not all of them are biological. Working together, they began the delicate process of reactivating the ship's dormant systems." Marcus provided the human perspective on controlled aggression, while the ship contributed its vast technological knowledge. They weren't restoring a warship, they were creating something new. A guardian. A protector. The process took weeks. As each system came back online, the ship's personality grew more complex. It retained its fundamental kindness, but gained the confidence that came with real strength. The parasites, sensing the change, grew desperate. They launched wave after wave of attacks, but the ship was learning to fight back. The turning point came when they reached the ship's core. Here, in the deepest chambers of its body, the original queen parasites had established their nest. These weren't the mindless drones that infested the outer sections. These were the intelligent leadership that had orchestrated the centuries-long infestation. They had grown enormous, feeding off the ship's core systems, becoming grotesque fusion of organic matter and stolen technology. When Marcus entered their chamber, they spoke to him through hijacked communication systems. "You cannot win, little mammal," they hissed in perfect standard galactic. "We have consumed this ship's essence. It belongs to us now." "Actually," Marcus replied, checking the power readings on his modified equipment, "I think you'll find that possession is 9/10 of the law. And right now, this ship has a new owner." The queens launched themselves at Marcus with surprising speed, but they had never faced a prepared human before. Marcus had learned their weaknesses over weeks of combat. He dodged their initial charge and triggered the electromagnetic pulse he had spent days preparing. The effect was devastating. The queens' stolen technology overloaded instantly, and their organic components writhed in agony as their bioelectric systems collapsed. But they were tougher than their offspring. Even dying, they tried to reach Marcus with their remaining strength. That's when the ship intervened directly for the first time. Ancient weapon systems that had been dormant for millennia came online with a sound like thunder. Energy weapons that had once cracked moons focused on the parasite queens with surgical precision. The battle lasted seconds. When it was over, the core chamber was filled with drifting ash that had once been the ship's tormentors. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked as the last echoes of weapon fire faded. The ship's response was complex. Grief for the violence, relief at its freedom, and something new. Pride. For the first time in its existence, it had actively protected something it cared about. It had chosen to fight, and it had won. "Good," Marcus said, patting the nearest wall affectionately. "Because now comes the really fun part. We're going to rebuild you into something special, something that can explore the universe and defend it at the same time." Around them, the ship systems hummed with renewed vitality. But in the depths of space, other eyes had noticed the sudden burst of energy from weapons that were older than human civilization. Ancient enemies who had thought the ship's builders were safely extinct were beginning to take notice. The ship and its human companion had won their first battle together. But the war was just beginning. 3 months after the parasite queens fell, Marcus stood in what had once been a storage bay and marveled at the transformation. The ship had rebuilt the chamber into a combination workshop and command center, growing new crystal formations that interfaced perfectly with human technology. Holographic displays showed real-time status reports from every system aboard the massive vessel. The ship had a name now. In the ancient language of its builders, it meant Star Guardian, but Marcus had taken to calling it Stella. The consciousness that flowed through its crystal networks had evolved beyond its original programming, becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. A fusion of alien wisdom and human pragmatism. "Marcus," Stella's voice resonated through speakers that grew from the walls like metallic flowers. "I'm detecting unusual quantum signatures at the edge of the system. Something is coming." "Is Kipo?" Marcus looked up from the weapons schematic he was reviewing. Over the past months, They had been systematically restoring and upgrading Stella's combat capabilities. The original weapons had been impressive, but Marcus had insisted on improvements based on human military doctrine, redundant systems, rapid-fire capabilities, and most importantly, the ability to learn and adapt during combat. "Show me," Marcus said. The main display shifted to show long-range sensor readings. Space itself seemed to be rippling near the system's edge, reality bending around something massive, moving faster than light through dimensions Marcus couldn't comprehend. Whatever was approaching, it was using technology that made even Stella's advanced systems seem primitive. "Analysis suggests multiple vessels," Stella reported, her voice carrying new undertones of concern. "Energy signatures match records from my builder's final war logs. These are devourers, Marcus. The same entities that seeded the parasites that nearly killed me." Marcus felt his blood run cold. During their months together, Stella had shared fragments of her builder's history. The devourers were beings of pure hunger. Entities that consumed entire civilizations not for resources, but for the joy of destruction. They had been the ultimate enemy that drove Stella's creators to transform their warships into peaceful explorers. "How many?" Marcus asked. 7 vessels confirmed, each approximately my size, but purpose-built for warfare. They've been watching from the void between galaxies, waiting for their parasite seeds to ripen. My sudden return to full power has attracted their attention. 7 ships, each a match for Stella, even in her current upgraded state. Marcus ran calculations in his head and didn't like the results. In a straight fight, they would be overwhelmed. Time until they arrive? 18 hours at current approach speed. Marcus nodded grimly. 18 hours to prepare for a battle that would determine not just their survival, but the fate of everyone in the system. The Kepler colonies housed nearly 1 billion people across dozens of worlds. If the Devourers broke through, it would be a massacre. "Stella, send an emergency transmission to the Galactic Council. Tell them what's coming." "Already done." "Response time for the nearest fleet is 4 days minimum. We're on our own." The 70 far, we are on our own. Marcus had expected as much. The Council's ships were designed for peacekeeping, not warfare against entities that had been fighting since before Earth's sun was born. Even if they came, they would only add to the body count. "Then we need to change the game," Marcus said. "Show me everything your builders left in the deep archives. Every weapon they ever conceived, every tactical doctrine they developed. If we're going to survive this, we need to become something the Devourers have never faced before." What followed was the most intensive 18 hours of Marcus's life. He and Stella dove into military archives that had been sealed for millions of years, studying warfare techniques developed by a species that had conquered half the galaxy. But Marcus brought something new to the ancient knowledge: human creativity and the willingness to break every rule of civilized warfare. Stella's builders had been honorable warriors, fighting according to codes of conduct that valued courage and skill over pure effectiveness. The Devourers had no such constraints, which had ultimately given them the advantage. But humans had learned different lessons about warfare. When survival was at stake, honor was a luxury few could afford. "This is what we're going to do," Marcus explained, pointing to a schematic he had spent 6 hours designing. "Your builders tried to fight the Devourers as equals, ship to ship in open battle. That's exactly what they're expecting us to do." The plan Marcus outlined was audacious to the point of madness. Instead of meeting the enemy fleet in traditional combat, they would use Stella's massive size and advanced technology to become something unprecedented. A mobile fortress capable of fighting an entire fleet simultaneously. First, they reconfigured Stella's hull. Using the ship's ability to grow new crystalline structures, they created external weapon pods that could be jettisoned and remotely controlled. Each pod contained enough firepower to threaten a capital ship, and Marcus planned to deploy hundreds of them. Next, they modified Stella's defensive systems. The original shields had been designed to protect against enemy weapons, but Marcus wanted more. He programmed them to become active weapons, creating energy fields that could tear apart anything that came too close. Stella essentially became a 20-kilometer ball of deadly energy. Most importantly, they changed how Stella thought about combat. Her original programming had focused on individual duels between honorable opponents. Marcus taught her to think like a human general, to use deception, misdirection, and overwhelming force without mercy or hesitation. Remember, Marcus said as the final modifications were completed, your builders lost because they tried to be noble. Noble is dead. We're going to win because we're going to be smart, ruthless, and completely unpredictable. The Devourers emerged from hyperspace like nightmares made manifest. Their ships were organic-looking constructs of dark metal and pulsing biological components, designed to inspire fear as much as to destroy enemies. They moved with predatory grace, clearly expecting an easy victory over a single, outdated warship. Stella, Marcus said, settling into the command chair they had grown for him in the central bridge. It's time to show them what humans do to bullies. The first surprise came when the lead Devourer ship attempted to establish communication. Instead of the peaceful response they expected from Stella's builder's descendants, they received a transmission that made their sensors scream with feedback. Marcus had programmed every speaker on Stella's hull to broadcast a recording of his grandmother singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic at frequencies that would overload Devourer audio systems. While they were still reeling from the auditory assault, Stella struck. Not with the massive energy cannons they expected, but with thousands of small kinetic projectiles launched at relativistic speeds. Marcus had realized that the Devourer's shields were designed to stop energy weapons and large missiles, not clouds of hypervelocity metal pellets. The result was devastating. 3 Devourer ships suffered critical hull breaches in the first seconds of combat, their ancient armor no match for simple tungsten rods moving at significant fractions of light speed. But the Devourers adapted quickly. They spread out into a wide formation and began firing with weapons that could crack planets. Stella's shields held, barely. But Marcus knew they couldn't withstand that kind of punishment for long. Phase 2, Marcus announced. Stella began to spin on her central axis, using her massive bulk as a weapon. The ship's rotation created gravitational effects that disrupted the Devourer's formation, while making her a much harder target to hit. At the same time, she began launching the remote weapon pods Marcus had designed. To the Devourers, it looked like Stella was falling apart under their bombardment. They pressed their attack, closing in for the kill. Too late. They realized that each debris piece was actually a self-guided weapon system, with more firepower than most frigates. The battle turned into a 3-dimensional nightmare as hundreds of weapon pods swarmed around the Devourer ships like angry hornets. Each pod was too small to be worth targeting individually, but together they created a killing field that even the ancient warships couldn't survive. 2 more Devourer vessels fell to the coordinated assault, their crews learning too late that sometimes the most effective weapon was the one your enemy didn't expect. But the remaining 2 ships were the largest and most dangerous of the fleet. As their companions died around them, they revealed why they had survived millions of years of warfare. Weapons systems that had been dormant came online, reality-warping devices that could bend space and time to their will. Marcus, Stella said, her voice strained as exotic energies washed over them. They're trying to fold space around us. If they succeed, they can compress our entire mass into a singularity. Marcus felt the ship shudder as gravitational forces tried to tear her apart. But he had one more surprise for the ancient enemies. Stella, remember what I told you about fighting dirty? Yes, Marcus. Time to show them the dirtiest trick in the human playbook. Activate the quantum mines. For weeks, Marcus had been working on a weapon that violated every treaty the Galactic Council had ever signed. Quantum mines were devices that existed in a superposition of states until observed, making them effectively invisible and intangible until the moment they detonated. The Council had banned them because they were too dangerous for civilized warfare. Marcus had built 200 of them. The mines materialized inside the Devourer ships' hulls, bypassing shields and armor entirely. The explosions that followed were visible from 3 star systems away, as 2 ancient warships simply ceased to exist, their matter converted directly into energy. When the light faded, Stella hung alone in space, surrounded by the drifting debris of 7 ships that had terrorized the galaxy for eons. Marcus slumped in his command chair, emotionally and physically exhausted. Status report, he said weakly. All Devourer vessels destroyed, Stella replied, her voice filled with wonder. No additional threats detected. Marcus, we actually won. Yeah, Marcus said, looking out at the debris field. We did. But this is just the beginning, isn't it? There are more of them out there. Stella's response confirmed his fears. The Devourers were just one faction among many ancient threats that lurked in the spaces between galaxies. News of this victory would spread, bringing new enemies to test their strength. Then we'd better get ready, Marcus said, standing up with renewed determination. Because from now on, this system is under human protection. And we're going to teach the universe what that means. Over the following months, Marcus and Stella worked to establish a new kind of defense network. They built automated shipyards that could produce vessels combining human innovation with Stella's advanced technology. They trained volunteers from across the system in tactics that emphasized creativity over tradition. Most importantly, they sent out a message to every peaceful civilization in known space. The age of passive defense was over. Those who wanted to preserve freedom and life in the universe now had champions who weren't afraid to fight for what they believed in. Marcus Chen, a simple mechanic from the edge of nowhere, had become something unprecedented in galactic history. The first human admiral of a post-species alliance, dedicated to protecting the innocent through superior firepower and absolute determination. The universe had been put on notice. Humanity had arrived, and they brought friends. In the depths of space, other ancient evils stirred uneasily. For the first time in eons, they had encountered something they didn't understand. A species that could take the universe's most peaceful beings and teach them to wage war with terrifying effectiveness. They would need to be very careful how they approached this new threat. Because humans, they were beginning to realize, didn't fight like anything else in the galaxy. They fought to win, regardless of cost or convention, and they were very, very good at it. Stella sang as she sailed between the stars, no longer alone, no longer afraid. Her crystal halls echoed with human laughter and alien wisdom, creating something beautiful and terrible that had never existed before. The Age of Guardians had begun.